Welcome everybody. We're going to get started here. I have muted everybody on the call, and you should be seeing my screen. But if you haven't, you can log in and see. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. This is Brent Hatcher of the Hatcher Group. I wanted to start doing a webinar because I get many calls and many people reach out to me and want to get involved with self-storage and want to learn about self-storage. And it's a great opportunity for me to kind of broadcast it to the masses and also keep everybody updated on the market because we're starting to move. We're on the backside of a peaked market. So it's important. I mean, I've seen things in the last 2-3 weeks that are even surprising me. So it's important that, all owners, possible investors, but, anything out there kind of, keep their ear to the ground via me and my team here on these calls. And if you do have a question during this, there should be a box in the top right, and you can submit a question and I will answer it at the end. Let's go to the next slide. So our topics today here, I want to talk about the current state of the market, what interest rates are doing, the self-storage performance, how each market's kind of handling some of the new development, where the property values are headed due to some of those performances, interest rates, new construction where we're seeing overbuilding, and this is a big one because we've done, my team's done over 200 proposals so far this year, and 75% of them or so are new builds, land opportunities, a year older or less, and so we got to get our idea of like what's this next, because everything in the real estate market is cyclical, and so we got to be cognizant that we're not going to keep going up forever. And then how does that new construction affect the value of your asset? And I have some pretty good insight on some of the stuff that we've been, seeing on my team here of late, because, there are some, some of the people in the market, some of the buyers are becoming a little bit more bearish and a little bit more skeptical on some of the stuff that is going on. So we'll get started here. And talk about the economy. I mean, you look at this slide and you look at the 18.5 million jobs we've added since 2010. And you kind of look how everything's cyclical, from 2000, dipping down in 2002, coming back up in 2006, and then obviously the Great Recession in 2009. And we've steadily added jobs, consumer confidence is coming back, and and development is happening, and everything is just full speed ahead. And it's kind of the question is what's going to be happening here over the next in the next few years is going to be interesting to see. Next slide. And as I spoke to the consumer confidence, I mean, you look at it, it's an all-time high since 2000, and everybody out there seems to have that positive frame of mind, which obviously is going to keep pushing the interest rates up. We've seen them up a full basis point since probably over the last 15 months. And as we can continue to see the economy improve, interest rates will move, and it has a direct effect on the value of your asset. There's no doubt about it. If an investor could buy a 6 cap and borrow at 4.5%. He can't, if he's got to borrow at 5.5% or 5.25%. He's going to need a higher cap rate to return, to get the same return. So it no doubt is having an effect. Although I will say we haven't seen the true effect. It hasn't affected us as much as I thought it would thus far. There's so much capital out there chasing deals, but it's definitely on the horizon and is starting to feel the effects a little bit. And when we talk about, the markets, and I think this is a good slide and we're going to look at later on where the most growth is as a population and the development growth is, you look at this markets like Dallas, Nashville, Raleigh, Charlotte, Florida. I mean, some of these markets, you know, Denver's one that's, you know, I think could be one of the dark blue, you know, Colorado, you know, these markets of where the population is growing. So, you know, when developers are looking to get into a market, that's where they want to be. And so we'll see it later in the presentation, but, you know, I think this is an important slide to understand where the hotbed is for, you know, development. And we're going to look at self-storage performance. You know, the orange line there is your cap rate, which is at an all-time low. I mean, it's lower than it was on average versus the boom of 07 and before the subprime even hit. And you look at the cap rate that, you know, kind of what you know, popped up to in 9 and 10, it still is, you know, much below. You know, we didn't ride the wave as much as the other assets did. You know, we saw a little bump in there, and we're back down. I think the market really evened out in 2012. That's where the market, when I looked at, you know, the amount of volume we were doing and going, wow, this is pretty nice. I didn't think we were ever going to get out of the slump of the Great Recession. And to be where we are today is incredible. I think we've got a little runway left in the cap rate, you know, or in the market. Not in the cap rate. I think cap rates are going to start creeping up just, you know, just because of interest rates. They can't go down. You know, when interest rates were, you know, pushing down in those 4s, I mean, there are people borrowing the high 3s and 4s. You know, you could push those cap rates, but now that rates are, you know, CMBS debt's in the low 5s, around 5, you know, even to 5.5, it's tough to make a deal work when you're trying to, you know, you can't negatively lever yourself in that situation. So when you look at the treasury rate, you look at the cap rate, you know, it's still a seller's market. There's no doubt about it. But, you know, we've seen the, you know, the success of the operations continue to flourish. Now, with this new development, that's going to be the question, is how long does this continue? On the investment side of things, you look at the investment transaction activity, up 41% from the peak in 07. You know, I think this slide is very true in the sense that we peaked in 16. I think early spring in 16, I mean, you could sell anything. Everybody, the REITs were really heavy. The private equity was really heavy. You know, even the mom and pops. We saw in 17 a lot of the institutional or REITs, you know, pull back, which in turn, you know, had to be picked up on that. You know, those transactions had to be picked up by the private equity side and the mom and pops and the local, you know, and regional buyers. So that's why I think we saw a dip, you know, in this level here. But, you know, you're starting to see the institutional buyers come back out, but they're very choosy in what they're looking at. And, you know, I think we dip back down here. I think 18 is actually going to be not below 17. I think 18 is still going to be very strong. Our pipeline is as healthy as it's ever been. We've done more thus far through the first 5 months than we did in 16 and 17. You know, we've ramped up a little bit, but I'm still seeing, you know, the activity levels out there. I'm also starting to see a little bit of the sellers come down to reality a little bit. You know, they were hearing this 15 and 16 numbers and values and cap rates, and, you know, we took it out in, you know, late 17, early 18, and, you know, they're not getting the number they originally were intended, but they look at, you know, the trend of this cycle, and we're on the back side of it. And so, you know, bird in hand, they're starting to move on a lot of opportunities, and you know, it's making sense for both. At the end of the day, it goes back to interest rates and cap rates. You can't borrow at, you know, 5 and 3, you know, 5.5, 5 1/4, and buy a 5 cap, you know, unless it's got, you know, upside. But, you know, on a stabilized asset, you can't be negative levered and make it work. Again, here with cap rates, you know, you've seen the average cap rate go down from even the peak, you know, you see. And for anybody out there, just to kind of basic, if you don't understand what a cap rate is, it is your return on your equity without debt. So let's say you have a property and your income is $200,000, your expenses are $100,000, and you have $100,000 net operating income. So if you had 0 debt, you make $100,000. If you wanted a 10% return, a 10 cap, that would be worth $1 million. So you saw back in the 90s, everything was a 10 cap in self-storage. We were kind of the ugly duckling. And then, as, we became the diamond in the rough, especially now, we've seen this cap rate plummet, obviously popped up a little bit there in 9 and 10 and 11 when we were, in the Great Recession. And you look at the average price per square foot on the sale side of things, I mean, we're continuing to go up. And that attributes, too, to the growing rents we're seeing in the market. So as cap rates go down, the price goes up. And so in those major markets and those markets we're talking about moving to, and to go back to kind of the basics, if you're learning what a cap rate is now to understand if you're going to buy a deal in Dallas, Texas, where there's a lot of, growth, you're willing to get a lower return because the population's going to grow, your rents are going to grow, versus if you buy in the middle of Pennsylvania and, a town of 10,000 people, there's not going to be a lot of population growth, so you need to get your cash flow because there's not going to be a lot of upside in that growth. So you may be looking at the 8s, and those 8% returns versus in Dallas, you used to be in the 5s, now you're near 6 on that. So the kind of hotter the market, the lower the cap rate, the more less populated the market, the less growth there is, the higher the cap rate, the more cash return. Everybody always asks us the million-dollar question, what are cap rates today? This is something Marcus and Millichap, went around our company, interviewed, looked at CoStar closings, and did an average of what we see. And I think it's pretty spot on. If you're in LA in a prime area or New York or, South Florida, you can be in that 4.5% to 5% cap rate on an institutional grade Class A deal. As you move to, I would say like a Columbus, Ohio, where I am, we would be a secondary Class A market. We would be right around those 6.25, maybe a little bit higher. I mean, this was done at the end of 2017. We've seen rates move up since the end of, 17 into the first and second quarter. And then tertiary markets, when you go into, those smaller markets, you can be in those 7 cap range. And when I say Class A, that's climate, non-climate, professional office, over 50,000 square feet, typically does over $500,000 in revenue, up to a couple $1 million in revenue. That's institutional grade. When you look at Class B, we're more along the lines of, Class B is going to be, you may have asphalt, an office that's just in the end of the, the building, or you don't have climate control. And if you're in one of those primary markets, you're still probably 5.5, 6 cap. Secondary market, again, you'll be around 7. Tertiary, you'll probably be high 7s, almost low 8. As for Class C, this is the gravel, that's under 50,000 square feet. If you're in a primary market, you're probably around a 7 cap. You're in a secondary market, you're probably 7.25, 7.5. Maybe even high 7s. In tertiary, you're 8, 8.25, maybe 8.5. If you're really out there in the middle of nowhere, you could push a 9 cap. So when you look, that kind of gives you a breakdown of kind of how everything breaks down in here. So going into how we stack up against cap rate trends versus the rest of the market. I spent a bunch of time on this. Self-storage cap rates have been going down, as is apartments. We're starting to see office pop up a little bit. I think due to the volatility of interest rates, and industrial is definitely going down. It seems to be a hot product type as well these days. And apartments are overdeveloping, kind of the way self-storage is. Moving on to some of the construction trends. I think this is a very important topic that needs to be addressed in today's market because I'm starting to see some developers pull back on deals and put them on ice. I kept seeing developers just power through, steel increases, labor issues, longer, construction time periods, interest rates moving up, and then these developers are just hell-bent on getting the deal done because at the end of the day, a lot of the times these developers, make their money on the fees and building them and by selling them. So, they're powering through a lot of this development. And I kind of see us as we're like a year behind the apartments. I could see next year, 2019, being where apartments are and going down on the development side. strictly because, you know, some of these developers are pulling back, or it's like, you know, my costs went up 10, 15%, interest rates are up. You know, this deal might not work. Again, it's very few and far between on those guys who are, you know, pulling out of it, but we're seeing the development, you know, become more rampant. And you see here, obviously, kind of coincides with what I just said. Completions are the bars there, the blue bars. We're considering to see them up, and the vacancy rate is just starting to creep up. And the same way we go back to apartments and talking to apartment guys in my office throughout the company, you know, they kind of flatlined last year, and I think we kind of are in the same boat of, you know, you were able to push rents, but all of a sudden, you know, you're 90% full pushing rents, and all of a sudden now you have a guy who developed down the road. May have two. If you're in Dallas and in Denver, you may have three, even in Florida. So when they come in and, you know, you speculated $150 for, you know, your rent, you know, $150 for a 10 by 10, and he comes in the market and, you know, he's offering the rent at $125, you know, you're going to compete with him, you know, and so you're going to have to lower your rent. So I think our rents are going to kind of slowly flatten out here, and vacancy is going to pop up a little bit, nothing crazy. And we're going to see the completion number. I think 2019 is going to be higher than that 2018 number. I think there's a lot of stuff. Like I said, a lot of our proposals are CO, new with 6-month-old, 1-year-old, land. They're building it right now, that type of thing. So I think we're going to continue to see that. And we are starting to see some investors who are building them, you know, look at it and say, you know what, bird in hand. I'd sell right now. You know, I got $8 million into it. It's going to take 3-4 years to fill up. You know, if I could sell it for $10 million, even though I was planning on getting $12 million, if I could sell it for $10 million, I may just move on and take the chips off the table. So that kind of gives the idea. And this, again, U.S. construction spending on self-storage. And again, this little peak could lag in the market because that's when a lot of the loans are originated. And so you look at the amount of money in the ramp up. I mean, heck, back in 08, I mean, even those lines you see from 08, I wish I could get back into 6 and 7 because that's where I think you would see the peak about 3/4 as high as you're seeing it in 17 and 18. So construction spending and self-storage is on the move. It's going up, and I truly don't see it going anywhere until, you know, I think we still got another 1.5 years before we see really a true slowdown, kind of the same way apartments go. Here's some self-storage development by pipeline. This was pulled out of the almanac. You know, Chicago, Houston topping out, Miami. And these increases, you know, Miami, Florida, 15%. I mean, we've seen some monster deals down there. Portland, Oregon, that West Coast is starting to really ramp up. I think the Northeast, you know, the New York, the boroughs, you know, Jersey, I went with clients up there multiple times to help them look at land 2 years ago and didn't move on it. Now you hear of deal after deal, you know, getting put in contract up there. So I think that market's going to really hit a boom/bust here over the next, you know, couple of years. I'm a little bit bearish on that market. I was really bullish on it. I mean, there's not many markets truly out there that I've been overly, you know, I used to love Pittsburgh and it's becoming really developed. I used to love Louisville. I still like, you know, the West Coast, although the Northwest part of the West Coast is starting to become more overbuilt. Dallas, Texas has added 20-25% inventory, more inventory over the last, or over a 3-year period. You know, and some of these places like Charleston, Miami, they're putting a moratorium on it to try to slow it down, because I truly think it does need to slow down, because the bad part for self-storage on these developments are, once you're kind of pot committed, you know, it takes you a year, you know, it may take you a year to get it, you know, out of the, you know, a shovel in the ground, another year, 8 months to build it, and then you're looking at a 3-year period to fill it on most markets. I mean, I've seen some in Florida fill up in 8 months, and you know, I've seen a lot of deals here recently that, you know, the biggest thing is we're looking at these rents they're getting, and they're 25% below market. So the first 2 years you're filling it up. The third year you're going to be bumping the rents and getting them up to market and stabilizing the asset. So overall you're looking at a 4 to 5 year process, and that's a big window. You build a retail center and you got a Walmart, you break even, or a hotel, you can be full pretty quickly. Apartments are a year. So self-storage has a bigger window of risk versus a lot of the market and on the development side. But again, it's a very popular asset type, and a lot of the operations have been doing well, increasing rents. It's just, how long is the runway? My guess is, we've got through, obviously, I think this year is going to be great. Next year, we'll start seeing some cracks, and beyond that is, I don't have a crystal ball. This is, and I spoke earlier about kind of where the population was moving, and you look at these yellow dots that are in here, which speaks to that, of everybody moving that way. And I'll actually, you look at Austin, Orlando, Vegas, Raleigh, Nashville, Houston, and we go to the next slide, it truly coincides with where some of the largest growth. This is the development, the 5-year development wave transform. I mean, Austin is completely boomed. Denver is crazy. Dallas, Fort Worth has seen a big growth, a lot of development. South Florida, the Triangle, the Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte markets. Nashville, I think Nashville's finally topped out. We've seen they were kind of one of the first ones to boom. And again, I think the Northeast is the next one that's going to see really the boom in development. They're a little harder to get a deal done, so I think some of those, obviously the city has a moratorium on storage as well. So, but you haven't seen the rent growth in the city as much as you would think. Wrapping things up here so we can get to questions. We got 8 minutes left. Self-storage still has runway left, but development is happening as we speak. I mean, and by the time we figure it out, and that's why all real estate markets are cyclical, it's going to be too late for some. Some people are going to get in and get their properties full before, we really, and I don't see a recession or a Great Depression hitting like Great Recession like we had in the last dip. Truly, I just see interest rates continue to creep up. You see a lot of the owners who are, selling because of they're opportunistic. They've built, they have no debt on it, and hey, if you get me $8 million, I'll sell it. You're going to see some of those sellers leave the market because they're going to hold, and you're going to see some of these developments that are, there are some that are pencil whipped, where they pro forma some rents that they are not going to get. And real estate taxes, and we're going to speak to that on our next webinar, real estate taxes are the next thing it's already in the process. I mean, real estate taxes are going up, and it's, all of a sudden, they're going to need more interest only to carry their loan, or, this deal, they're going to have to feed it or do capital calls, or the bank's going to take it back. I don't see the rush like we saw in 9, 10, 11. I think it's going to be an opportunity here and there, and I don't think you're going to steal it for 50 cents on the dollar. I think, some guy's going to build a deal for $8 million, and the bank's going to sell it for 6.5, and it's barely going to work for the buyer who takes that. But there will be opportunities like that in the coming future. And I think, like I said, interest rates going up are something that slows us down into that next recession. I still think we're in a very strong seller's market, especially for stabilized assets. There's a lot of opportunity out there for sellers who, because there's a lot of capital out there chasing deals. I get 3 to 5 calls a week of new people wanting to get in self-storage, and this is why I'm having these, is to kind of give you a little help educate people, not only because I don't have time to talk to everybody and teach them or let them understand what's going on in the market. So this is an opportunity to do so. But I still a very strong seller's market. I think that's got at least another year left on it, but I think we've got a good runway on that. We're seeing construction costs go up across the board. Steel, even though the tariff didn't go through, the demand at these mills is very high. we are in a labor crisis. I was on site with a client the other day and ran into a gate installer, and he says, I've had a job out there, inquiry out there for 2 years and hasn't been able to fill it with the right people. And, you talk at all the subs are harder to get, and they're naming their price anymore. So you're seeing construction costs go up. The demand is high for those construction crews, which is making your timeline go longer, which means you're burning more interest only, which means you're going to, you need to get those renters in quicker. So not to paint a too negative of a construction that, if you are building, it's not the end of the world, I think, but you've got to be cognizant of some of these things that are going on around you. And some of these markets, hey, you'll be insulated from some of this, but there are markets where you stretch in the tertiary market. It's not quite where you wanted to be, but you had a good piece of dirt and you got a decent price on it, and then prices went up, but you're still moving forward. You got to be cognizant of this. I looked at a client, we looked at possibly, changing up the development style on one of his to lower the development cost to make the deal work. Because you've got to be realistic of your exit strategy of when you're actually going to stabilize the asset. Because we've seen some retrades here of late, and mainly because of the development that's happening in the market. Actually, all of them are because of the development happening in the market. That kind of makes the investors a little worried about what's going to be happening, to their rents over the next, 12 to 18 months. But like I said in the beginning, self-storage is still a resilient asset. We will ride the market swings. We don't ride them as high as some of the other asset types where, an office or retail, it's kind of like if the market goes down, then the kid who has a single bedroom apartment goes and rents an apartment with his buddy and needs a place to store. Or the larger, the landscaping company was growing that got their own flex space unit that may go to a 10 by 20 or 40. So there's always that, there's always somebody kind of wanting to rent. So that is, that's my recap here. Let me see if I can look up and see if I have any questions. Do we have any questions? I saw a raised hand. I don't see anybody with a question here. I'll unmute it. We can unmute everybody. So if you have a question, feel free to speak up here, or shoot me an email, go to my website.
Your little question or whatever.
Does anybody have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. My question is, how do we know class A, B, and C for self-storage?
One will be your population. Main thing is your size. If you're under 50,000 square feet, you're already out of the A category. You can't be 30,000 square feet and be A. I don't care if you've got the most beautiful office. You need to be over 50,000 net rentable square feet. You need to have an office to be an A. And you need to be in more of a populated area, 100,000 people within, 5 miles at a minimum. A lot of the REITs like to see 300,000 people in that area. When you look at B, you can be in that 40, 50,000 square feet, and maybe a little more tertiary, but you're not going to be out, in a town full of 10,000 people. You still need to be in a market that's going to push 100,000 people. And then in C, if you're in those tertiary markets, like I said, 10,000 people, 15,000 people, or you're under, 40,000 square feet, you're going to be in those C. You're going to be in the C category. Anyone else?
Thanks.
Well, awesome. Well, also, anybody who wants to ask a question, call me. I didn't have my email on there, but feel free to go to the website, hatchergroup.net, correct? hatchergroup.net, or email me at brett.hatcher@marcusmillichap.com. We will also, I did see a question, we will have, I can email you the copy of the slides. We're also going to put them on our website. This whole webinar will be, you can rewatch it or pass it along. So we will have, you can email me for the slides personally, or I will have them on the website. Well, I appreciate everybody this afternoon. I kept it right at 30 minutes like I wanted to. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If not, have a great day.